Hey everybody, welcome to Startup Week here in Chattanooga, presented by CoLab. I'm Shayn Fernandez. I'm the corporate lead at Rockridge Venture Law, and we've got some very interesting points of discussion today. We're going to talk about all things SBA, the Small Business Administration. We're talking about loan programs, talking about investments, the more important things like grants and long-term contracts. First, just got to do a legal disclaimer here. This is not legal advice. We're not your lawyers. Nothing in this webinar should be construed as legal advice. So that's now that that's past us, we can move on to a little bit more interesting topic. Again, we're talking about the SBA, the Small Business Administration. And the SBA has gotten a lot of publicity over the last couple months with COVID-19. Obviously, the SBA was heavily involved in the CARES Act and implementing the CARES Act with the PPP and the economic disaster, injury, and disaster loans. So that's been getting quite a bit of the publicity from the SBA side, but that's going to be a very, very small part of what we're going to be talking about today. We'll discuss the loans and we'll discuss investment vehicles through the small business investment companies, but really we're going to focus on the upside. We're going to focus on grants for innovative companies and technology. We're going to be focusing on long-term contracts, set-aside contracts, all sorts of fun stuff that you might not have a lot of experience with and you might not heard a lot about. So again, we'll start off here with loans. Just to run through it real quick, I think a lot of people are familiar with the EIDL loan and the PPP loans. Obviously, that's kind of that time has passed. But also the SBA is known for their 7A loan program, which where they lend money to small businesses that show both a need and an ability to achieve a market and have a sustainable business model. And they've generally kept loans around $2 million the past 10 years, but they've actually increased that up to I think about $5 million is the upper limit on the principal of those loans. So that's an interesting program to really look at if you're needing to scale your business and you think that debt's one of the answers for that. We'll also talk briefly just here about the investment side of the SBA. So this is mostly for VCs, fund managers, private equity groups, hedge fund managers. So qualified managers might be able to get a license to operate as a small business investment company. And basically, these small business investment company vehicles can raise capital from outside investors, private investor groups, through a fund. And every dollar that they raise from private investors, the SBA might match with issuing debt of maybe $2 for every dollar raised at a cap of $175 million. So this is basically to promote investment in small businesses in general. Again, this is probably a very small crowd that I'm speaking to here as far as an SBIC standpoint, which is mostly for fund managers, but it's certainly an interesting program if you're in that area. All right, so let's get down to brass tacks and what we're really talking about here. So, okay, I'm in tech, I've got a startup, I've got a biotech company, I've got a service company, I've got a research project that I think can scale. What can the SBA offer me? Well, the big thing is the SBIRS TTR programs, and this is generally kind of known as American Seed Fund. Um, Basically, the SBIRS TTR has a mission, and that mission is to support scientific excellence and technological innovation through the investment of federal research funds in critical American priorities to build a strong national economy. Well, what does that mean? Well, that basically means that the federal government has billions of dollars that they spend each year through various federal agencies, such as the Department of Defense, Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Energy, just to name a few that they spend and that they grant to small businesses that show some type of product or some type of research that they think can commercialize and go to market and perhaps raise funds in the future. So we're talking SBIR programs. We're basically talking about it's a phased grant process of up to $2 billion. in which kind of facilitates research and development and innovation, and to take that research and development and to turn it into a product to ultimately sell to not only the government but to private purchasers. And then the STTR program, similar to small business tech transfer program, it's basically working with universities and with private companies and spinning that out and transferring it over. Um, so although these are programs for small businesses, as you can kind of see, the money we're talking here is anything but small, with about 5,000 daily awards and a couple $1 billion on the table. These programs are definitely something that you should take a look at. Just to go a little bit more in detail here, again, it's all about innovation and commercialization here. It's not improving a widget. It's mostly finding solutions that are innovative, that are changing the game. So with the Department of Health and Human Services, it might be vaccines, it might be drug delivery systems, it might be pharmaceuticals, it might be medical devices, things like that. With the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, it may be things such as dealing with cybersecurity or blockchain technology. It just depends on the industry. And right at the bottom there, you see the Department of Energy with Oak Ridge National Labs. They're working on supercomputing and energy, sustainable energy, solar, and things like that. So that's really what we're talking about here. And these don't have to be proven necessarily. There doesn't have to be a product already in place, but it's got to be some idea that can be implemented and turned into a commercial product or service. These grants, again, go in phases of three. It's important, the phase one, phase two, that's quite a bit of non-dilutive investment funds on the table, meaning that the SBA is not taking equity. They're just granting this funds with really, I mean, there's some strings attached, but not the type of strings attached with private investment. The real kicker here is phase three. As you'll see, there's no funding that comes from a phase three. What the real importance of phase three is once you've meeting the requirements for phase three and you're awarded phase three, it basically shows your product's ready to go to market. And if your product's ready to go to market, what could be the real desirable path there is getting sole source contracts to sell that product without competition for a limited period of time to the federal government, to various agencies. Again, just another kind of branch of the SBIR innovation is the collaborative research and grant programs. A lot of times these are mentorship programs. So we have a great one here in Tennessee with Innovation Crossroads, Oak Ridge National Labs, Department of Energy. I think that they're accepting applicants right now for the next cohort. So be sure to check that out if that's something that you think you'd be interested in. Here's another, probably the biggest part of the SBA's program. It's set aside contracts. So the federal government is the biggest buyer of goods and services in the world. I mean, it's not really susceptible to the same market conditions that you see in private commercial business. I mean, the government's spending more this year than it ever has before. Obviously, that's a little bit different circumstances, but if you look at 2019, before COVID, this federal government spent $4.5 trillion. 1.1 trillion of those dollars went to the Department of Defense. And so obviously when you're talking about Department of Defense, you're thinking of, airplanes and weapon systems and things like that. But actually, the Department of Defense has really kind of changed quite a bit of their demand to non-traditional things such as cybersecurity, such as blockchain technology, such as different communication systems. And the Department of Defense or all the other federal agencies as well just have basic needs. I mean, you think of food, of clothing, of buying toothbrushes, things like that. They're buying everyday products and services that are necessary, IT help desk solutions, things like that. It's just the sky's the limit on the different opportunities that are available with the federal government right now. And so, how does this come up with the SBA, and where does the SBA play in all of this? Is these set aside contracts. So basically, every year the federal government sets a goal of having 23% of the procurement dollars, the dollars that it spends to private contractors, to go to companies that qualify as small businesses. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper. What the heck is a small business? What does that mean? We'll go over that. But basically, 23% of procurement dollars of that 1.1 trillion or 4.5 trillion is quite a bit of money. Um, and luckily or happily, the government for the last 6 years has met those 23% procurement goals. So it's not just a lofty goal, it's something that's actually comes to fruition most of the time. And similar to the small business set aside contracts, we have socioeconomic set aside contracts. And these are for woman owned small businesses, veteran owned, service disabled veteran owned, hub zone, 8A. And basically, when I'm speaking of these companies, they're companies that have the requisite ownership and control requirements where they're owned and controlled by that particular group. And just to kind of further clarify what we mean by set aside is if a government sets aside a contract for small businesses, it might be a 4-year contract or something like that to provide help, maybe IT services to Langley or something like that. When it's set aside, it means that only small businesses can compete on that contract. So you're not going to be going against the Raytheons, the Lockheed Martins, or these big, huge conglomerates of government contractors in those competitions. You're going to be going up against other small businesses. And similarly, when you have these socioeconomic programs, you are also only competing against another woman-owned small business or another business that's located in a hub zone. So one kind of exception to that is the mentor protege program, which basically allows a small business and a large business to come together to form a joint venture, which is basically a contracting and entity vehicle to compete on set aside contracts for small businesses. The idea is that the big business is there to kind of train and to mentor the small business so that the small business can grow in that particular field. So you might have a situation where your business teams up with Boeing, and Boeing can help you handle portions of the contract, and they can perform some of the work, and your job is to kind of roll and perform a good portion of that work. Also, in satisfying subcontracting goal or procurement dollar goals, and that 23% is subcontracting goals. So even large companies like Lockheed and these big government contractors, they have to fulfill subcontracting goals in their contracts. So they might have to have 15% of the funds that they receive under that contract go to small businesses. So they'll subcontract some of that work out. Oops. And to go back to the set aside for socioeconomic businesses, one of the big pioneer programs that the SBA had was the 8A program. So we're discussing all the benefits of being a small business, the loans, the investments, the SBIR, the innovation grants, and these contracts. But what in the world is a small business? Well, we get the statutory definition here, and as you'll see, it's not too helpful. So, a business entity organized for profit with a place of business located in the United States and which operates primarily within the United States or which makes a significant contribution to the U.S. economy through payment of taxes or use of American products, materials, or labor. Well, what in the world does that mean? Well, so basically, we dealt with this a lot recently with the PPP and EIDL loans when it came out who was applying for these. I think Harvard applied and some other bigger publicly traded companies applied, and I think it hit a lot of true small businesses pretty hard that these companies were also getting substantial loans under the PPP and the CARES Act. But what the standard is that you look at to determine something's a small business is you look at the industry and you say, hey, is this a small business in that industry? So generally the two standards are that you look at are employee count or gross average receipts, average annual receipts. So for instance, like if you're in creating spaceships, I mean, obviously anyone who has the finances in place to build a spaceship is probably not a small business compared to somebody who manufactures boots or something like that. So there's different standards depending on the industry. So you can still be large, but comparatively in the industry you're not. So that's where we get these various codes and kind of how that standard's in place. So if you look here, for instance, you'll see the NAICS code right here. And for instance, 541715, research and development in physical engineering and life sciences. So that is an employee count measure of 1,000. So if you have less than 1,000, you would be a small business. Compared to research and development of social science and humanities, that's a revenue-based count. So that's $22 million. So again, that just kind of rehash that a little bit. The NAICS code, it's a North American Industry Classification System. It's either average annual receipts or employees. And so when we're talking set aside contracts, um, a contract will come up on betasam.gov, and it will have an industry code attached to it. And it will say, hey, it's this industry code, and here's the size standard. So if you have less than this, then you're small and you can compete for this. Now, these companies are sophisticated, and it's a very sophisticated system, and you have lawyers and accountants who are also sophisticated. And so one issue, and we saw this with BPP, is whether or not a company has a number of annual receipts or employees is kind of relative, right? I mean, I could have a company where I'm manufacturing boots, and I could create a company that does the soles of it, or I could have a company that does the purchases of fabric. And so I've divided that whole company into like 6 different companies, and they all have their own revenue streams and things like that. Well, I mean, if I'm the only one who owns it and controls it, then it should be treated as one company, right? So that's what the affiliation rules mean. So basically, it closely connected companies or individuals, they have to aggregate their numbers so that we see past simple structuring. Now it gets a little complicated. There's different forms of affiliation. The different affiliation rules apply to different programs. So like VC investment under set-aside contracts that are socioeconomic is very difficult to avoid affiliation. It was very difficult under PPP to avoid affiliation with VC investment, but that's not necessarily, well, that's really not the case with SBR. SBIR is kind of focused on facilitating VC investment. So they're actually going to have a bunch of carve outs for affiliation rules between a VC, its portfolio companies, and the person that's applying for the SBIR contract. But that's probably a little bit above what you're looking for here on an overview. So let's move on to the socioeconomic set asides. So socioeconomic set asides also have to be small businesses under the applicable NAICS code, but they have an extra challenge, and that challenge is that if it's a woman-owned small business, it has to be owned, controlled, and possessed by a woman. So the female owner needs to own 51% of the stock or the membership interest or the partnership interest. It needs to control the board, needs to control the high level aspects of the business. So it needs to either have, be the sole board member or have other female owners that control a majority. There's a unique issue called negative control. It's where somebody can veto major transactions or day-to-day things, and so they're deemed to have negative control. And the third prong there is possession. So possession's similar to control, but it's much more of a day-to-day type thing. So woman-owned small business, a female owner should be on the board. She should also be the highest ranking officer, and she should also have the skills necessary to perform the general nature of the business. And so what you have is you have those set-aside contracts, but you also have socioeconomic set-aside contracts, which even limit competition even further by limiting the competition amongst those that are certified under those programs, whether it's woman-owned, veteran-owned, service-disabled veteran-owned, or HUBZone. So how do you find these programs? I think I've mentioned it a little bit throughout. That you can find all these opportunities are publicly available on the internet. I mean, they're every day new opportunities come out. When you're talking about set aside contracts or contracts in general, beta.sam.gov, you can basically tailor it to your industry. You can tailor it to your location and see what opportunities are available. SBR.gov, that's where you find all of the various grant opportunities that are available. In score.org, that's just great for resources or finding mentorship. So I think that's about. I think we covered a lot here. I'm going to stick around. This is pre-recorded, but I'm going to stick around for some questions. If you want to throw that in the chat, um, that would be great. But yeah, that's an overview of the SBA program. We really hope you enjoy it.